bottle down.
I just sat here with my water bottle, getting very comfortable. Anyway, welcome back. You're watching and listening to Breakfast with Stephen and Ellie.
Let's take you through the front pages, should we? We'll start with The Independent. It says the BBC is in crisis as numerous sports shows are axed.
The Mirror goes with Lineker's message to the Bee, but I'll never be silenced.
For The Sun on Sunday, reports that the BBC Director General is refusing to resign. So why should he resign? I mean, I think it's very odd that he's been asked.
Yes, it's taken on a whole new life today, hasn't it? And finally, The Star reports on a different Gary the goat. Apparently he's going to prison. And it is important to say he is a goat. Gary Lineker is not going to prison.
No, it's just on the little side panel there. So it's not actually the headline.
He actually is a goat as well.
I don't really know why we're telling you about that.
It just adds confusion to the story, doesn't it?
There'll be discussions later. Let's talk to journalist and author Ella Whelan and political commentator Benedict Spence. Good morning, you two. Ella, let's kick off with The Observer, should we? And poorer working parents going to get more help? Because it's often the working poor who get ignored in what we see in budgets and things.
Yes, so this is all about childcare, and we don't know what the kind of package for childcare is going to be in the budget. We know that there have been certain plans that have been rejected, so for example, extending 30 hours of free childcare to younger kids. At the moment you can get it for 3 and 4 year olds, but extending it so that 1 year olds and 2 year olds could have it, that's been rejected because it's too much, it's supposedly too much money. But now parents eligible through Help with Universal Credit will be able to get some kind of funding up front. We don't know the levels of it, but it's just, I picked this out in The Observer because I thought a really interesting fact that people don't know is that, you can, under the current system, you can claim £646 a month for one child and just a bit over £1,000 for a second child. Which is the same cap that it was in 2005, and we know now that childcare is completely unaffordable. It's eye-watering amounts of money. And I've just had a little boy, and I looked to see, sometimes working around Westminster in Parliament as a journalist, and I thought, I'll go to the Parliament creche. And, obviously not representative of a lot of other places across the country which probably are cheaper. But in Jeremy Hunt's own workplace, 2 days in the Parliament creche is £585.
What?
2 days. 2 days. And if you wanted to go for a week, it's over £1,200. In and around where I live in Hackney and in sort of getting into central London, it's almost standard for a week of childcare to be £1,300 or something like that. So it's quite clear that the cap needs to be raised extensively. But I think also it's not just about, you said it's working people who are on lower incomes who get ignored. This is kind of unaffordable levels for even someone who's on a relatively decent salary.
Yeah.
I cannot go back to work unless I'm, on a full-time basis in an office, unless I'm willing to take a massive pay cut. And, I think the Chancellor is, Jeremy Hunt is talking about the fact that everybody who can work needs to be in work. There are lots of mothers who want to work for part-time, who want to get back in. There's only so many times you can sing Ring Around the Roses before you and your child get very bored of it. You want to have some kind of balance in your life. But it's literally impossible at the moment unless they do something very drastic.
Well, we had lots of the views coming in yesterday was saying the same thing, which is quite a tough line, really, which is, only have kids if you can afford them. And if that means only having one, just have one.
No one will be able to have them then.
I think that's a very... People forget having children is kind of a fundamental part of the human condition, is reproducing and passing on your genetics.
I don't think people forget that.
I think often when people sit there and go, don't have children unless you can afford it, I think that's a very silly attitude to take, given that most people, when they're in the window in which they can actually safely have children, a lot of people are not earning enough, by those people's metrics. And this is why I'm afraid the state does need to step in and help parents, because otherwise you will have a population crash like Japan is having, like many other countries are having, and that has really bad knock-on effects for the elderly people who need those young people to pay the taxes to fund their healthcare. That's the long and short of it, and that is why you get things like the NHS collapsing in itself, because there aren't enough young people to pay the tax burden. So, you can say, don't have children unless you can afford it. The country needs children. It needs to reproduce. It needs to continue onwards for the systems to keep working. That's the long and short of it.
Yeah. Let us know what you think about that. GBNews at gbnews.uk. Certainly very interesting. Benedict, let's stick with you, shall we? This is in The Observer. This is the migration bill again, but a Tory revolt over a different part of this bill. It's about child detention.
Somebody other than Gary Lineker is also very unhappy about government policy, and it's being led principally by Priti Patel, the former Home Secretary. That's why her potential intervention might be seen as very significant. Being a former Home Secretary, also being perceived as being a very, quite a hard figure on the right of the party in terms when it comes to things like immigration. But this is all around rules concerning the potential detention of children who come via small boats. They come via illegal means. Is that families and children can be locked up as part of measures to deter people. And I think the very fact that you have quite stringently Conservative MPs saying actually that this is neither particularly humanitarian nor a particularly good look. Actually, I think it's been proven. What early polling has shown that actually a harder line on immigration, whilst that is popular amongst many members of the public, I think almost by 2 to 1, locking up children is never particularly popular.
No.
That's never going to go down well.
The problem is, though, with the people coming across, and we've seen this time and time again, it's who is a child and who is not.
Exactly.
I mean, there was that fella who was clearly about 30 who was sent to a secondary school because he claimed to be 14 or something.
Exactly, and people are told what to say. People are coached what to say when they come across. It's also, we need to remember, people who are coming across in small boats, all of those small boats are launched by criminal gangs. They have an interest in making sure that this continues. So they have an interest in making sure that there are as many vulnerable people, women and children, or people who say they're children, as possible to garner support so that actually it's more difficult to stop people from coming across. This is a business technique, ultimately, is how it's done. So whilst it's not nice that children might be potentially locked up, I think the government is in a very difficult position in terms of trying to find a way to deter people from coming this way. Because we do need to remember, last year, if you take the 45,000 people who came across the Channel out of the equation, this country took in a net increase of 500,000 people, including about 160,000 refugees from Ukraine. There are already around 20,000 refugees from Afghanistan, a similar number from Syria. This is not a country that is unnecessarily hostile towards refugees. There is one particular route that is run by criminal organisations that also happen to run the cocaine and heroin trades. That's just an aside, and therefore are very keen to keep these routes open, that the government wants to shut down. And I think when you put it in those terms, actually I don't think that's particularly unpopular. But locking up children, that's never going to go down particularly well.
It's never going to work. Let's have a look at the Sunday Telegraph, Ella, should we? And sex education. There seems to be controversy about the amount of sex education being given at school. They're sort of still claiming it's too much, whereas back in my day, the argument was always there's not enough. We had a 10-minute video of a naked family playing volleyball, I remember. And that was it. That was your lot.
Because that really prepares you for adult life.
But of course, the argument back then was, of course, the teenage pregnancies and all the rest of it was because people didn't know what was going on. And now they're saying kids are being taught too much.
One minute you're playing naked volleyball, the next minute you're paying thousands in childcare.
It's actually interesting that you could use that comparison, because a lot of relationship and sex education today is not actually about the birds and the bees. It's not actually about, the sort of the physics or the biology of what goes on and understanding how bodies work and all that kind of thing. A lot of it is about a sort of a grayer area of how do you manage relationships, or talking about gender identity, or these things that aren't sort of as concrete as contraception and sex and things like that. And so there was a kind of an investigation by the Telegraph that found that lots of schools were teaching children as young as 12 things that I think most people would find probably inappropriate. So quite detailed things about sexual acts, quite detailed things about how you would feel about engaging in sexual relations with one another, something that you don't really think about until you're into experienced adulthood. And so this has prompted Rishi Sunak to have a review into relationship, sex and health education, and look at not just having a minimum guidance, which is you have to at least teach them this, but talking about a ceiling, a maximum guidance, so to say you can talk about sort of contraception, how to be safe, how to sort of the birds and the bees, but all of this extra stuff about the detailed sexual acts, leave that alone, because there are just some things that are too adult for young people. And I think most people, I'm sort of conscious of the fact that I used to do these paper reviews and do, I'd pick stories about drinking and smoking, and now I'm sort of, everything's like childcare and children. I'm feeling very boring at the moment. But I think it is important because a lot of us, we talk about sexualised societies, we talk about kids knowing too much too young. And I think also we can sort of, teachers mean well, no teacher is trying to sort of freak out kids, but I think actually we can freak them out a little bit because the world of love and relationships is complicated, and I think you can only really truly understand it when you get that little bit older.
It's always meant to be a lesson that you came out with feeling disgusted, and how dare your parents ever do that again, sort of thing. So you don't want you don't necessarily need all the detail,
and you don't want to make it sound sorry, but you really don't want to make it sound too attractive too young, because the whole point is you're not meant to be doing it until you're of a certain age.
Yeah, no, fair point. It's a fair point. Fair point.
Benedict, let's look at the Sunday Telegraph. Same paper, but totally different story. This is statues of old white men at risk,
Yes,
apparently.
we love a good story about statues being pulled down because they're problematic in some sense. This is Welsh Government guidelines that suggest that statues that don't meet certain criteria in promoting a decolonised understanding of the world could be moved, they could be taken down, they could have extra plaques added to them for context, that sort of thing. We've heard this before with statues across the UK. It's always very sort of tiresome when
do these people think, I mean, I know, look, there are issues with these statues and what some of these people stood for and what they did. I get that. But do they think that people are queuing up to see these statues and pay homage to these people and what they did? Most of us, we don't even notice them after you've lived there a while, do you?
Yeah, I mean, London is full of statues of I'm sure, very problematic people, but I don't go around looking at them feeling like, oh, that shouldn't be there, that doesn't look great. The fact that whenever people talk about decolonisation, that always makes me laugh, because every society on Earth is built on the bones of other people who were colonised and oppressed. Even the Inuits slaughtered the people that were in the Arctic before they got there. It's a nonsense idea that that everything has to be decolonised, because what you get at the end of it, you don't get
anything at all.
Exactly, it's reduced down to nothing. And it is important to remember the bad bits of history as well as the good. For example, I mean, a statue of Nelson is there usually to commemorate the Battle of Trafalgar. Of course, many people died. Many people died throughout the Napoleonic Wars. It was the era of slavery as well. It's not a perfect situation that corresponds to our morals, and that's the point. It's a reminder that we have made progress, that we have come a long way. To get rid of these things, it's churlish. It's trying to appeal to people who I don't think need to be placated. I don't really think that there's actually that big an audience who are desperate for these statues to be brought down. There's a small cadre of activists and people who feel like they have to make a difference because that's what they want to do. And ultimately, I don't think that society should be bending in favour of those people.
Well, it's the fact, I mean, I don't know if this is a quote from the story or not, but it says, these imperialist memorials, some people find offensive. Well, some people find everything's offensive to somebody.
Exactly, and where do you stop? I mean, there's a statue of Oliver Cromwell outside Parliament who slaughtered my ancestors. I mean, he really went to town on the Irish. No one suggests that his statue should be pulled down because, I think we have this weird approach to history in which we try and judge it with today's sensibilities. So you're meant to judge history on the basis of whether or not it offends you, which is a completely Philistine approach to learning. But it's also the case of maybe some things might offend you, and you might have to be able to get over it. But you might have to be able to grow a thick skin.
If we don't remember history accurately and we do just boil it down to what offends us and what doesn't, then we get to the situation that we currently have in this country where everything you don't like is Nazism, and that's just thrown back, and it doesn't matter what it applies to or how relevant it is, you just invoke the Second World War, and that's your answer to everything, and that's not progress, that's not learning from history at all.
No, I tend to agree on that one. Now, can we talk, because I've just been in Scotland a couple of weeks ago, and I was saying, before we went, I'd love a kilt. I didn't get a kilt, but...
You'd suit a kilt.
But I really fancy...
The question is, though...
I really fancy it.
Would you go the whole hog? Knickers or no, under the kilt, that's the real question.
No, you'd have to do the real thing. You'd have to do the real thing.
McCoy.
But But that aside, is it cultural appropriation?
Yes, this is a really interesting story. You know, there's been a massive uptick in weddings and, you know, post-pandemic, everyone's getting married and hurried off and getting their celebrations. There's lots of people looking for kilts, and lots of people doing these kind of DNA tests and finding out that they've got some Scottish heritage and wanting to go and get their tartan made. But kilt makers are reporting that they're also being asked, is this a problem? Will I offend Scots by culturally appropriating their kilts? And you can imagine sort of Americans and people ringing up and wanting to have their little bit of Scottish heritage, but also being worried. And I just think, what a sad state of affairs. It has to be said, these kilt makers are saying, no, Scots love it, please keep coming.
Really?
And, you know, don't worry about it. But there is a bit of a tension in terms of, you know, the particular tartan is meant to represent a particular clan. You're not meant to wear the wrong one. But, you know, I think when it gets to the point at which we're saying that we would be culturally appropriating Scottish people, I mean, would you be allowed to eat, I don't know, tatty cakes? You know, where does it stop? I think most people should just relax. If you want to pretend that you're Scottish because you've got, I don't know, 10% of your DNA thing, go ahead and do it. The Irish are well used to this. Everyone wants to be us, and we don't mind.
It's true.
Yeah, no, it's
Except
fair
for
point.
Cromwell.
But isn't it interesting? Because, of course, I mean, women wear tartan all the time. And what they call, you know, women in kilts. Women wear kilts all the time, not the proper.
Yeah.
But
Fashion things.
No one just thinks about that, do they?
No.
It is just a bit of fashion.
Yeah.
I'm wearing a kilt to my sister's wedding next year.
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
She
yeah.
doesn't know. She'll still be in bed, so I don't mind saying.
Have you got any
s-
Scottish in you?
Spence is a Scottish name. There's about 6 different tartans that
Well,
I
it
could technically wear.
might be a Scottish name, but are you actually
Oh,
Scottish?
yeah, no, I've half of my family's from Liverpool, the other side's from Glasgow, so...
Oh, right.
Yeah, it's...
Oh, you can get away with it.
You'd
then.
be all right then.
Yeah.
See, I like the bagpipes. I love bagpipes. Like, again, I've got Irish heritage. I'm like, could you have bagpipes at a wedding or something, or a party if you're not
You could
Scottish?
have Irish pipes.
Elaine pipes, they're called.
Oh, there you go. That would be my
So
way.
you can get away with it
There you
at your wedding. This is happening? I didn't know you were
Well,
going to.
no, it's not happening. No, not yet. Anyway, but
yet.
you need to think about these things, Stephen. You have to think about the music.
You do plan ahead.
do.
I had a harp at mine.
Did you? It's
Yeah.
very classy.
It was classy, yeah.
Very nice.
Yeah, we decided we'd have a harp. Do you have anything at yours?
My dad sang at mine.
Did
Oh,
My dad it was a dad band. It was my dad and my best friend's dad. And
That
it was
is
a dad
so
band.
nice.
They were cracking. They were great.
Excellent. Very nice. Are you married, Benedict?
I have yet to meet a woman foolish enough to make...
Oh,
It'll happen in all in
Time,
good
of
time.
course.
Ella, Benedict, thank you both very much
Thank
indeed.
you
Good to
very
see you this
much.
morning.
well, that was fun, wasn't it? Very nice. Now,